There has been reporting from multiple outlets suggesting that the United States is currently leaning towards a ground offensive against Iran, with the major target people talking about being Kharg Island, which Trump has been talking about since the 80s, but of course speaked up and talking about it more since recent offensive operations. Kharg Island is a hub where 90% of Freudian slip, Iran's exported fuel product goes through this location in order for them to put it out to the wider market. And the Trump administration might be under the feeling that if they take Kharg Island, they can essentially hold the Iranian state hostage, that they wouldn't be able to finance the government, they wouldn't be able to finance the war, they wouldn't be able to finance their proxies, and it would eventually just be a ticking clock until eventually the Iranians would have to eat a hay, come and negotiate, and give Trump his list of 15 demands, which he has given them, and the Iranians have already rejected. Well, if you were to read the reports, they sound a little bit like this. An official from one of the countries mediating between the U.S. and Iran tell the Times of Israel, and right now the mediations have been extended for another 10 days until early April, as Trump extended his 2-day deadline, then a 1-day deadline. He's now on his 3rd deadline, and he decided to make it 10 days instead of another 2 days, I assume. And Iran tells the Times of Israel that U.S. President Donald Trump appears to be leaning towards ordering a major U.S. ground operation against Iran, with Washington convinced Tehran will buckle under such military pressure. The official, intimately familiar with the mediation efforts, says the U.S. privately recognizes that Iran is not likely to agree to concessions presented in Washington's 15-point plan and has dispatched thousands of troops to the region in order to capture Tehran's Kharg Island on Trump's orders. Okay. So, few things. Number one, do we have forces in the area that could do an offensive operation? Yes, and we're moving them in. We're moving in the 82nd Airborne, and we've already moved in thousands of Marines. And we have been making lots of flights from bases in Europe to bases in the Middle East. What have been on all of those flights, it is hard to say. So trying to estimate exactly how many soldiers in the Middle East based on purely public statements from the government listing how many troops they've moved there, I think is not a possible. You just can't do it. I think that they have announced some of the movements to the Middle East in order to increase diplomatic pressure. But if they were to actually carry out an operation, them moving other troops to the Middle East while also not making a lot of noise about it is totally possible. So I don't want to estimate just based off of public statements. I will just say thousands of American soldiers are in the Middle East. Some of them are Marines. Some of them are the 82nd Airborne. Others are working on military bases to continue strike operations. Others are working on aircraft carriers to continue bombing raids against the country. They have hit at least 9,000 targets within Iran, according to American estimates. And that target list continues to expand, will probably go over 10,000 in the near future, if operations continue at this tempo and there is not an immediate cessation of hostilities, which at this point does not look rather likely, either from the American perspective and what the United States wants to do, or from the Iranian perspective or what Iranians want to do. What many people who have gone to war have found out very quickly is that war is not a two-player game. I mean, that war is a two-player game, it's not a one-player game. The Russians found this out, and the United States is finding this out. The United States might have thought at this point, after killing the Ayatollah, killing much of the IRG's command, making shows of destruction of their energy infrastructure, having horrific atrocities committed, like the bombing of a children's school, having bombings that kill nameless amounts of civilians, IRGC commanders, high-ranking officials, and their families, as well as military installation after military installation, air defense system, rocket launcher system, rocket storage, drone storage, artillery production, long-range missile production. The thought may have been that in order to avoid continued degradation of whatever they had left, as well as the death of the new Ayatollah, who already lost his father, his mother, his wife, and his son, that they would accept some deal. But when you go off of what the Trump administration said their goals were, stop an atomic program. Well, the atomic program is as degraded, damaged as it is today, as it was 1 year ago. That means it hasn't really changed. They haven't given up their atomic weapons. They are still pursuing an atomic program. And the officials that have taken the place of the old dead officials are people who wanted the atomic program more. Well, obviously, the circumstances have changed, and people can have a change of heart in the face of death. That doesn't mean that is where we are right now. As we stand, the Iranians probably have not let go of the idea of attaining an atomic weapon. Have they gotten rid of the ballistic missile program, of the long-range missile program? No. In fact, off of the 15-point plan put forward by the Trump administration, they actually get to keep their long-range missile program, which Trump before said had to be done away with. Instead saying, well, they get to keep it, but it has to be monitored in a way, and it has to be reduced. So they have to alter it so it cannot threaten the continental United States or America's allies elsewhere, which right now they have not accepted. They have also not accepted the demand to get rid of their support for proxies. And they have not only not accepted their plans for getting rid of atomic weapons program, they have also not accepted the American plan to get rid of their holding of any atomic material whatsoever. So they couldn't have a civilian program, a medical program, no program at all. The Iranians have countered with their own proposals, which include no sanctions, and we're going to charge for the Strait of Hormuz now. That's something that has gotten less coverage. The Iranians are not only saying you will cease these operations, they are also saying you will cease these operations. We will keep all the things we want to keep, like we discussed. You will take your bases in the Gulf states and you'll move them away. Goodbye. Move American bases out of the UAE, move them out of Qatar, move them out of Saudi Arabia. And you will also allow us to charge a fee for any ship that wants to go through that 2-mile gap in the Strait of Hormuz. No sanctions on Iran. No American bases in the region. Charge for the Strait of Hormuz, and reparations for good measure. These are very different positions between the United States and Iran. Even if you were to think up of a plan where the United States says, no, fine, we'll remove the sanctions, because the United States did offer sanctions relief in return for their delivery of the 15-point plan, which again, as we've discussed, is likely not gonna come to fruition. So that puts these two positions very distant from each other and makes it much more likely that the Trump administration might want to find another way to increase the pressure. Now, one way to increase the pressure is to strike 1,000 more targets and try to get to an even 10,000, right? That sounds like a number Trump would like in his head. But if 9,000 bombing strikes, bombing runs didn't do it. Well, not 9,000 bombing runs. 9,000 targets hit didn't do it. Why would 10,000 targets hit do it? Even if you killed the new Ayatollah, who they said they already wounded, even if they killed the new Ayatollah, why wouldn't another one be chosen by the Council of Elders? And then they have a new one to take its place, possibly as radical, if not even more so. Would they want to continue to target storage facilities? Well, that might continue to degrade their capacity. But if the reports are true that Russia is not only providing intelligence support about where American troop deployments are and where they're being moved, tactical support and training their forces and how to use these long-range drones, but also providing them long-range drones themselves, that combined with the fact that it's going to be hard to get rid of every single storage facility and every single production facility means that Iran is probably going to have some capacity to throw explosives over towards the UAE, Qatar, and possibly threaten everything from oil facilities to desalination plants to American military bases. That's not even to talk about the fact that to threaten the Strait of Hormuz, you're going to need, mines, short-range missiles, hell, maybe even some artillery that could do damage across the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, the drones can do damage. The ballistic missiles can do damage, but you don't even necessarily need that to do damage. They did damage to us in the 80s, damaging one of our ships that tried to run the Strait of Hormuz during the tanker war that was part of the wider Iran-Iraq war. Why wouldn't they be able to do it now, 40 years later, with more technology, being assisted by the Russians, one of two countries on the planet that knows drone warfare better than anybody? So this puts Trump in a precarious position. He needs to find a way to increase the pressure, but also every way that he has to increase the pressure, using ground forces means much more political risk from a guy who campaigned as the pro-peace candidate, and the potentiality that even if they do take Kharg Island, what if the Iranians then just divert their export towards the other islands and facilities they have? Maybe they won't be able to produce and export as much as they were before. That's certainly true. But maybe they'll produce enough to sustain the state in an existential struggle for survival, when most Americans see this as a war not only of choice, but of a whim. A war that was not discussed in advance, a war that there was no, beforehand, here we're going to break it down. The weapons of mass destruction is threatening New York City. No, we got one statement about an imminent atomic threat, and then that threat was ill-defined and left ill-defined in order to obfuscate from the fact that it likely had to do with a threat to American forces in the Middle East after the Israelis would engage in an air campaign against Iran. Marco Rubio alluded to this fact and then did not bring it up once it was clear that said fact would probably turn much of the American public possibly against Israel, which is certainly not the Trump administration's objective. So I think that there's a good possibility that Trump might go for Kharg Island. There's also a possibility that these troops are being moved into the region to go after another target. For example, let's say they go after Kharg Island and they reroute all their oil to these other facilities. It might be Kharg Island along with the other islands along the Iranian coast that also refine product, because if they just divert it to somewhere else, then you had a costly operation that still keeps the Iranian state afloat. So maybe it's not an operation for Kharg Island, but it's an operation for 3 or 4 major processing facilities along 4 different islands along the coastline. That would expand the realm of the operation. That would expand the amount of locations where Americans could take casualties, both in claiming the island and holding the island as they respond with missiles, artillery, drones, and whatever they could throw at occupied Iranian territory, which has not been occupied since the Iran-Iraq War. That land was not occupied during the Iran-Iraq War, but the last time Iranian territory was during the Iran-Iraq War. So obviously, a lot of people are not going to take that lying down. That is a possible area for operation. Another could be them going after the radioactive material. If they were to go in Iran and get the radioactive material and get out of Iran, that would be the most material advancement towards America's stated goals at the start of this. And when I say America's goals, I mean what Trump has said at different press conferences at different times, sometimes walking back and then walking it back forward, really walking in a circle on some of these. But if they were to get that radioactive material, that material would be worth billions of dollars, and it's very difficult to smuggle more of that material into your country. You can do it. You can go on the international black market. You can try to do that, but that's a years-long game that you would also have to do while trying to outrun U.S. authorities and Interpol, who would be chasing you down the whole time trying to stop you, because nuclear nonproliferation is still in the interest of basically every single country in the world, nuclear and non-nuclear. So if Trump was to do that, which would mean landing U.S. ground forces deep inside Iran proper. When I say Iran proper, I don't mean to say that these islands are in Iran, but having to go over the mountains, having to go deep into the country, having to do a landing, having to support that landing by doing strikes around it so nobody could move in forces to stop you from doing it. Having to go over any obstacles you find along the way, passageways that could be blown up. It's in a difficult position. You might have to find out it's not in this building. It's actually in a building that's equidistant over there. This comes with, any ground operation on Kharg Island or any of these islands comes with immense risk. That operation comes with its own set of risks. So these are all ground operation options that the Trump administration has. They might feel that by holding their oil and energy economy hostage as they continue to threaten to let loose strikes, or possibly maybe, they haven't said this, but blockade one of these islands. That could be another way that they could take their power away from these islands, though that those ships could also be hit. That's also a risk that American seamen, American sailors would have to face. But I think that his general idea is if we hold the energy economy hostage, it's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time. So that is one possible avenue. The other being if you attain their atomic material, then it will be much easier to get them to negotiate a position away from a nuclear weapons program. Because if you've blown up their centrifuges, if you've blown up their infrastructure, you've killed maybe some amount of their scientists, not just us, but the Israelis have as well, and then you take their atomic material, they might get to a point where, you know what, it's not worth it. Not worth it. Now, because of the risk of American casualties, because of the risk that they engage in this operations and the Iranians say afterwards, you know what, screw you, we're going to still try to wait you out. If you take Kharg Island, you might have to find out you're going to have to take a second island, a third island, a fourth island in order to really take out all of their export capacity. Because of the risks that this could be responded to by the Iranians striking oil refineries in the UAE, oil refineries in Qatar, oil refineries in Saudi Arabia, targeting desalination plants if their energy facilities are targeted. If the Iranian state says, if our state can survive, well, your state, which is reliant in Kuwait, 90% of their water is reliant on desalination. We're going to go after the desalination plants with no alternative, meaning an immediate water crisis, no alternative for those desalination facilities. So I think that an operation comes with immense risk, and that's why most American leaders would probably want to avoid this. But Trump has cornered himself. He went as far to say unconditional surrender. He went as far to remove sanctions on both Iranian crude and Russian crude to try to stabilize international markets. He released 172 million barrels from our strategic reserves after promising to increase them, and has let loose a litany of munitions in the country. I think that he wants to come away from this with some sort of victory. He keeps talking about the gift that the Iranians have given them. We don't know exactly what that gift is. The Iranians have not defined it, and Trump has not defined it. And the Iranians and Trump continue to talk differently about the ongoing negotiations in public, but of course that could be domestic level posturing. We do not know. But there is a real risk that the Iranians might make the estimation that it might make more sense to just wait out the Trump administration, let them move, let them fall on the oil market sword, and continue to raise casualties as they get closer to a midterm. There is no Iranian midterm that's coming up in an existential struggle against the United States. That same thing is not true over here. So that's the two balances. Will Trump engage in this operation to try to save himself from the failure of engaging in such a massive operation where you have to divert resources, American soldiers die, and you're no closer to achieving any of their objectives? Or will he do that, accept that, or will he go forward, attempt some other operation to try to increase pressure and make the Iranians buckle? I would lean towards the former, but there is reporting that suggests the latter. I saw that Ken Klipperstein, who is an alternative media reporter, he put out a report saying that he was told that this is meant as posturing. I'm sure somebody told him this was meant as posturing, and I'm sure that the Trump administration would prefer that it stay posturing and that they get a settlement. But if the positions stay so distant from each other, it's hard to see how the posturing becomes a settled position. You would have to see a radically different document than the 15 points that the Trump administration has put forward, and something radically different than what the Iranians have said they want to accept. And so despite what Ken Klipperstein might have reported, despite the possible risk to U.S. personnel and to the wider economy, there is still a clear passageway here for Trump to engage in some sort of ground war or expansion of the war to try to bring the Iranians to buckle. Whether that means trying to blockade the island and putting American sailors at risk, whether it means a ground offensive and putting them at risk, whether it means an operation to try to get the atomic material and putting those 82nd Airborne and Marines at risk, or whether that means specific strikes on their energy infrastructure, which could be, repaid in kind towards the closest targets, which are going to be the Gulf states. In today's sycophancy meeting with Trump, it was said that the gift was letting 8 Pakistani ships through. Well, Pakistan is suffering pretty brutally right now from an energy crisis due to this lockdown. So that is good for Pakistan, which Trump wants to keep a cordial relationship with. But in the grand scheme of things, that does not get us any closer to a settlement. That just means improved relationships between the United States, Pakistan, and Iran. Interesting, though. I did not know that. Oh, by the way, here is John Bolton talking about this very thing I was mentioning about Kharg Island being a potential distraction. It could also just still be his first target, or one of 3 or 4 targets, as we've discussed. But here's John Bolton discussing something similar with Caitlin Collins of CNN.
On Kharg Island, you said that you think the United States should block Iranian oil shipments and take Kharg Island. I mean, we're seeing this troop buildup, and we were just talking last night about the 82nd Airborne, what exactly they're designed to do. Do you think that that is something that they're actively preparing for, not just keeping options open? Do you think taking Kharg Island is a real thing we could see in the next few days or weeks?
Well, you know, if we had taken Kharg Island about 3 weeks ago, when it still would have been a surprise to the Iranians, that might have made some sense. I think the main thing is to stop the flow of Iranian oil onto the world market. I don't understand why we didn't blockade the Strait of Hormuz ourselves at the beginning. To allow any Iranian oil to get out was a mistake. To waive sanctions on Iranian oil is a mistake. We don't want to finance the Iranian regime in its military campaign against our service members. So at this point, I think Kharg Island, I mean, one way to look at it might be is a deception operation. Let the Iranian authorities put all kinds of mines on Kharg Island and around it and divert their attention from something else. That may be what's at work.
The longer time passes, the more opportunities the Iranians do have to dig in. But you can only dig in so much on an island like that. I do want to put forward also, if you were thinking there was going to be any sort of congressional authorization for use of military force at this point, Mike Johnson says that's not necessary because we haven't hit the 60-day mark. And it's the 60-day mark, you see, when something truly becomes a war.
There's all this talk about whether soldiers are going to take Kharg Island or elsewhere. What do you say to lawmakers who say if that happens, that definitely is when you would need AUMF, an authorization for the use of military force?
We'll have to see how it shakes out. The intention and the hope is that we're not going to have...
The answer is we're going to have to see how it shakes out, because the answer would ultimately be he would want to do nothing in that period until the 60-day timeline had expired, regardless if American forces are fucking outside of Isfahan or Tehran. Because his instinct, whether it came to conceding to Trump that, you know, we need to challenge the results of the 2020 election and being one of the leaders for his election conspiracism in Congress, or it's just, you know, cleaning up the shattered glass and broken cups and thrown silverware after Trump lashes out at U.S. allies or at a lack of progress in his war. He's just going to be there to clean it up. That is part of the reason why he's had so little trouble with the Trump administration, is that mild-mannered attitude towards Trump putting American forces in harm's way, and Congress's authority and Congress's responsibility, more importantly, to make sure that our servicemen are getting into wars that the American people have signed on to and not ones they haven't.